I'm James, I'm 28 years old, and at my own brother's college graduation dinner, my father told me to give him my car or forget I ever had a family. Before I tell you how I played a secret recording that made their faces turn a ghostly shade of pale, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who you're talking to, especially when you're about to lay your life bare. The air in the restaurant was heavy with the scent of money and expensive perfume. It was one of those places my father, Thomas, chose for occasions like this, a place designed to be intimidating. The tablecloths were starched so stiff they could have been made of porcelain, and the waiters moved with a silent, unnerving efficiency. It was a stage meticulously set, and we were all his actors, waiting for our cues. I sat there, feeling the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Across the table, my younger brother, Kevin, was the star of the show. At 22, he was a fresh graduate from a prestigious university, a 4-year journey my parents had paved for him with gold. He basked in the attention, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. His girlfriend, Melissa, clung to his arm, her eyes scanning the room with an appraising look, as if confirming this was the level of success she was signing up for. My mother, Linda, was radiant. She fluttered between her husband and her golden child, her laughter a little too bright, her pride a little too loud. She was the perfect supporting actress. My Uncle Robert, my dad's brother, sat beside me, a solid, quiet presence in the swirling vortex of my family's drama. He caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was his way of saying, "I see you. I know this is hard." He was the only one who ever did. My girlfriend, Sophia, squeezed my hand under the table. Her touch was an anchor, grounding me. Without her, I think I would have floated away. The whole clan was there. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins I barely spoke to from one year to the next. A full house. An audience for the performance my father was about to orchestrate. After the ridiculously small portions of the main course were cleared away, my father stood, tapping his wine glass with a fork. The manufactured chatter died instantly. He commanded the room without effort. "A toast," he announced, his voice resonating with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never been told no. He waxed lyrical about family, about legacy, about the duty we all have to uplift one another. It was a beautiful speech, if you didn't know the man giving it, if you didn't know the words were just another tool, another form of leverage. Then his gaze fell on me. The warmth was gone, replaced by a hard, calculating glint. This was the moment, the real reason for the performance. "James," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the far corners of the room. "It's time for you to step up and show that support. Kevin is embarking on his career. Image is everything in his world. He needs a respectable car to make the right impression." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on me. I could feel the pressure of dozens of eyes. I was pinned in the spotlight. "So," my father declared, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, "as your graduation gift to your brother, you will give him your car. It's the proper thing to do. It's what a good brother, and a loyal son, does for his family." The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on me. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree, delivered publicly to ensure my compliance. He had boxed me in. I looked at my father's expectant face. I saw my brother's smirk widen. I saw my mother nodding her eager approval. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't look away. I held his gaze. "Dad?" I said. My voice was steady, much steadier than I felt inside. "I think my gift for Kevin is going to be far more memorable than that." My eyes flickered to the small stage at the front of the restaurant, where a single microphone stood under a soft light. A current of unease rippled through our table. They expected me to fold, but they had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire play. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to understand that my life was a collection of moments just like it. My family wasn't a circle of love. It was a pyramid with my father at the top, Kevin right below him, my mother beside them, and me somewhere down at the bottom, tasked with holding up the base. Their love was conditional, their support transactional. I learned that early. I was 16 when I truly understood. The summer air in our garage was thick with the smell of oil and rust. I'd spent weeks painstakingly restoring an old 10-speed bike I'd bought for $20 at a yard sale. The frame was chipped, the gears were a mess, but it was mine. I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing the chain with an old toothbrush, when my dad and Kevin walked in. Kevin, who was 12, was proudly wheeling a brand new, shimmering blue mountain bike. It had front suspension, disc brakes, and more gears than a professional cyclist would know what to do with. It was his birthday gift. "Check it out, James," Kevin shouted, ringing the crisp, new bell. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. "Wow, Kev, that's amazing." My dad clapped Kevin on the shoulder, beaming. "Only the best for my boy." He then glanced over at me, at my grease-stained hands and the pile of dirty rags on the concrete floor. His expression wasn't one of pride in my resourcefulness. It was a look of faint disgust, of pity. "It's good you're learning how to be self-sufficient, James," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a life sentence. It was his way of saying, "This is your world. The world of second-hand things and hard labor. Don't ever expect to be in his." This pattern was woven into the fabric of our lives. When I got sick one winter with a nasty case of bronchitis, I was told to take over-the-counter medicine and rest. When Kevin got a simple head cold a month later, my mother rushed him to the doctor for a full checkup, just in case. When I made the honor roll in high school, I got a pat on the back. When Kevin won a third-place ribbon in a school art show, his drawing was professionally framed and hung in the living room. The college years were the starkest example. My parents sat me down for the real-world speech. They explained that their financial responsibility for me was over. It was time for me to be a man. I worked 3 part-time jobs, flipping burgers, stocking shelves, and delivering pizzas, to put myself through state school, racking up student loans that felt like a mountain. I remember one particularly brutal semester. I was running on fumes, living off instant noodles and sheer willpower. My calculus grade was tanking because I was too exhausted to study after my late-night shift at the diner. In a moment of desperation, I called home. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling slightly. I'm in a bit of a tough spot. I'm thinking I might have to drop a class. I was just wondering if maybe you guys could help me out with a small part of the tuition. Just a few $100s to get me through." The silence on the other end of the line was a judgment. "James," my father finally said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "we have discussed this. Life is about taking responsibility for your choices. If you cannot handle the workload, perhaps you should reconsider if you are cut out for college. We are not a safety net." I hung up the phone, a hot wave of shame and anger washing over me. I felt like a failure. A week later, I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt, gushing about the non-refundable, first-class tickets they had just purchased for a 2-week family vacation to Hawaii. Why? Because Kevin had gotten straight A's on his midterm exams at the elite private university they were paying for in full. I sat in my cramped dorm room, the smell of stale pizza in the air, and just stared at the wall. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about worth. And in their eyes, I simply wasn't worth the investment. The car, the reliable 4-year-old sedan they now demanded I hand over, was the culmination of all that struggle. I had saved for 2 years to buy it. Every dollar represented a 16-hour workday, a weekend spent in the library, a small pleasure I had denied myself. It wasn't just a machine of steel and glass. It was a monument to my resilience. It was the tangible proof that I could build a life for myself, despite them. And now, they wanted to seize that monument and present it as a trophy to the one person who had never had to build anything. Thankfully, there were people who saw the truth. My Uncle Robert, my dad's own brother, was a man of few words but deep perception. He ran a small but successful tech company and carried himself with a quiet confidence that was the polar opposite of my father's bluster. At family gatherings, while my dad was holding court, Uncle Robert would find me. He'd ask about my coding projects, about the challenges of my software engineering classes. He saw me not as a failure but as a peer in the making. Your independence is your greatest asset, James. He told me once, over a beer at a 4th of July barbecue. Don't ever let anyone, especially your father, convince you it's a liability. And then there was my cousin, Emily. She was a few years younger than me, a quiet, artistic soul who often faded into the background of our loud family. I'll never forget one summer picnic when she was about 14. A couple of our older, jock-type cousins were gathered around her, mocking the drawings in her sketchbook. They weren't being overtly cruel, just dismissive and condescending, calling her art weird. I saw her face flush with shame, saw her trying to make herself invisible. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't a fighter, but I couldn't stand by and watch. I walked over and stood between her and the others. Hey, leave her alone, I said, my voice low but firm. They were surprised. They mumbled some excuses and shuffled away. I sat down on the grass beside Emily. Can I see? I asked gently. She hesitated, then shyly handed me the sketchbook. It was filled with the most incredible, imaginative drawings, fantasy creatures, and surreal landscapes. They were beautiful. We spent the next half hour talking about them, about her ideas. It was a small gesture, a simple act of validation. I didn't know it at the time, but I had just made the most powerful ally I would ever have. I had made a deposit of kindness into a bank of loyalty that would one day yield an incredible return. My best friend and coworker, Daniel, was my reality check. He'd witnessed the family dynamics firsthand, heard the dismissive tone in my mother's voice over the phone, and seen me come into work looking emotionally drained after a weekend visit home. Dude, you've got to stand up for yourself, he'd say, not with judgment, but with genuine concern. They're walking all over you, and you're letting them. And Sophia, my girlfriend, was my anchor and my compass. She was the one who helped me untangle my own feelings of guilt and obligation. She helped me see that their treatment of me wasn't normal. Their definition of love is about control, James, she'd tell me, her eyes full of a fierce belief in me that I was only just beginning to find in myself. You deserve better. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for what you can give them. When the embossed invitation for Kevin's graduation dinner arrived, she was the one who voiced the question I was afraid to ask myself. Are you sure you want to go? She asked, her hand covering mine. You know how these things end. You always end up hurt. I stared at the expensive cardstock, at the looping, elegant script. A small, stubborn, foolish part of me still clung to hope. The hope that this time, this milestone, would be different. That they would finally see me as an adult, as an equal. I have to go, I told her, my voice more confident than I felt. He's my brother. Besides, I added, a new, unfamiliar resolve hardening in my gut. This time will be different. I promise. And I meant it. I just had no idea that the person who would make it different was me. Back in the restaurant, my words, my gift for Kevin will be much more surprising, had detonated the fragile piece. My father's face, which had been a mask of benevolent pride, hardened into the face of the ruthless CEO I knew so well. The mask was off. What is that supposed to mean, James? He demanded, his voice dropping an octave, losing its performative warmth and gaining a sharp, dangerous edge. Before I could formulate a response, Kevin let out a short, dismissive laugh. Oh, come on, bro. Don't be so dramatic, he said, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. It's just a car. A thing. You can get another one. Think of it as an investment in the family's prestige. When I'm a partner at the firm, I don't know, I'll buy you a steak dinner or something to say thanks. He said it with the casual arrogance of someone who had never had to work for anything of value. He truly believed he was being generous. Melissa giggled beside him, a tinkling, unpleasant sound. She looked at me with an expression of pity so profound it was insulting. Her eyes said, "You're just a minor character in his story. Learn your lines." "My car is not an investment, Kevin," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through his condescension. "I worked for it. Every dollar. It's mine." "Oh, here we go." My mother, Linda, sighed dramatically. dabbing at the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. She looked at me with an expression of deep disappointment, as if I had just committed a terrible social faux pas. "James, please, don't make a scene. Your father is being very generous by even including you in this celebration. The very least you could do is show a little gratitude and grace." Gratitude, that word again. It was a weapon in their arsenal, a tool to induce guilt and enforce compliance. Gratitude for what? For being allowed to sit at their table while they plotted how to take the one thing that symbolized my hard-won independence. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, who had a habit of speaking inconvenient truths, decided to intervene. "Linda, he has a point," she said, her voice reasonable. "Thomas, this is a bit much to ask. The boy worked hard for that car. You can't just demand he give it away." "Patricia, please," my mother snapped, her voice turning sharp and cold. "This is a family matter. Our family. I would appreciate it if you would stay out of it." Aunt Patricia recoiled as if struck, and a tense, angry silence descended upon the table. The rest of the dinner was an exercise in misery. The clinking of silverware against expensive china was deafening. The small talk was forced and brittle. I felt like a ghost, present in body but completely invisible in spirit. I ate without tasting, my mind racing, a storm of anger and resentment brewing inside me. Later that evening, the core family unit, my parents, Kevin, and a few select relatives, retreated to my parents' sprawling house for a nightcap. Sophia insisted we go, her hand a firm pressure on my back. "You need to see this through," she whispered. "Don't run away from it." I was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water, my hands trembling slightly, when I heard their voices drifting from the study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I froze, my hand tightening on the cold glass. It was my father's voice, low and laced with irritation. "He's being more stubborn than I anticipated. This should have been simple. He's always been difficult." My mother's voice chimed in, smooth as silk. "So ungrateful. He has no idea what we've done for him. He gets that from your side of the family, Thomas." Then, Kevin's voice, high-pitched and whiny, the voice of a spoiled child. "So what's the plan? I need that car for my start date. All the new associates are getting company cars or have nice ones of their own. I can't show up looking like some charity case." "We will handle it," my father said, his tone shifting. It was no longer the voice of an irritated father. It was the voice of a strategist, a predator closing in on its prey. "We just have to apply the right kind of pressure. We need to frame this correctly. We make him understand that the car is just a material object. Family is what's truly important. We'll let him stew on it tonight. Tomorrow your mother will call him. She'll lay on the guilt. She's an expert at that." I heard my mother make a soft sound of agreement. "He'll soften up," she said with chilling confidence. "He always does. He can't stand being on the outs with us. He's too afraid of being alone. He knows he can't survive without his family." "Exactly," my father concluded, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The main thing is we secure the car before you start your job. Once that's done, we can finally stop pretending we need him around so much. He can go back to his own little life, and we can focus on what's important." I stood motionless in the dimly lit hallway, the cold glass sweating in my hand, my heart pounding in my ears. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't just about the car. It was never just about the car. It was about my utility. I was a resource to be exploited, a tool to be used and then put back in the box. "Stop pretending we need him around so much." The words echoed in the silent chambers of my heart, a final, brutal confirmation of a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own home. I wasn't a son. I was an obligation, a burden they were eager to shed. A wave of nausea washed over me. I backed away from the door, my movements stiff and robotic. I stumbled out the back door onto the stone patio, gasping for the cool night air, my lungs feeling tight and constricted. I leaned against the cold brick wall, my mind a chaotic whirl of pain and betrayal. Sophia found me there a minute later, her face etched with concern. "James? What's wrong?" You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't form words. I just shook my head, trying to process the sheer, calculated cruelty of what I had just heard. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration felt like an electric shock. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. A text message. It was from a number I didn't have saved, but the name attached to the account made my breath catch in my throat. Emily. My quiet cousin. We hadn't texted in years. The message was brief, just 5 words. I thought you should have this. Below the text was a video file. With a sense of dread, I pressed play. The video was dark, the angle low, clearly filmed from a hidden position. But the audio was perfectly clear. It was the entire conversation I had just overheard. Every manipulative, soul-crushing word. He's being stubborn. She'll lay on the guilt. She's an expert at that. Once that's done, we can finally stop pretending we need him around so much. Emily. She must have been in the study, curled up in a chair, unnoticed as always. She had heard everything, and she had remembered a small act of kindness from years ago, at a summer picnic. She had paid back that simple gesture with an act of loyalty so profound it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I played the recording again, and then a third time. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp ache in my chest. But as I listened, something else began to rise through the ashes of my heartbreak. It was a cold, hard anger, a clarity so sharp and pure it felt like a shard of ice forming in my gut. My mother was right about one thing. I couldn't survive without my family. But I was just now, in this moment of brutal clarity, realizing that they were not my family. Not in any way that truly mattered. Sophia watched my face, her expression shifting from concern to alarm. What is it, James? What's on that phone? I looked up from the screen, and she must have seen the transformation in my eyes. The hurt was still there, but it was now overlaid with a chilling resolve. The victim was gone. It's the truth, I said, my voice steady and devoid of any tremor. And tomorrow, at the party, everyone is going to hear it. The next 24 hours were the strangest of my life. On the outside, there was an eerie calm. On the inside, it was a whirlwind of focused, methodical preparation. The shock had receded, leaving behind a steely sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive recipient of my family's toxicity. I was an active agent in my own liberation. The following morning, I met Daniel for coffee at our usual spot before work. I didn't bother with small talk. I slid my phone across the table and motioned for him to put in his earbuds. Listen to this, I said. I watched his face as he listened. His usual easygoing, joking demeanor melted away. His eyebrows furrowed, and a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. By the end, his expression was one of grim, righteous fury on my behalf. He took out his earbuds and slid the phone back to me. I knew they were bad, man, he said, his voice low and intense. I knew they were selfish, but this is a whole other level of evil. This is calculated. What are you going to do? I'm going to the graduation party this afternoon, I said, my voice even. And I need a favor. You know people everywhere. Do you know anyone who works the audiovisual for the grand ballroom downtown? A slow grin of understanding spread across Daniel's face. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a spark of excitement. As a matter of fact, I do, he said. My buddy Mike is one of their lead techs. He's a good guy. He owes me one from when I helped him move last year. What do you need? I need to be able to plug my phone directly into their main sound system, I explained. I'm going to tell the event coordinator that I'm preparing a surprise family tribute video for my brother. I need it to be seamless, no technical glitches. I need a direct line in, ready to go, no questions asked. Consider it done, Daniel said, already pulling out his phone and tapping out a text. Mike will set you up. He'll probably leave a cable for you right by the stage podium. Just act like you're supposed to be there. Confidence is key. That was step 1, the logistical part. Step 2 was more strategic. It was about securing my future. I went back to my apartment, the city noise a dull hum outside my window. I looked up my Uncle Robert's number and dialed. I forced my voice to sound casual, as if I were just making small talk on a normal Tuesday. "Hey, Uncle Rob, got a second? I have a quick business question for you." "Of course, James. Shoot, what's on your mind?" His voice was warm and steady, a comforting contrast to the chaos in my head. "It's just a hypothetical," I began, choosing my words with care. "Let's say a person is involved in a toxic business partnership. A partnership where they've contributed a lot but have been consistently undervalued. If that person were about to sever that partnership, what would be the smartest way for them to protect their own assets and ensure they land on their feet? Legally and professionally, I mean." There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp mind. He was too intelligent, too perceptive, not to read between the lines. He knew I wasn't talking about business. "Well, James," he said slowly, his voice taking on a more serious, deliberate tone, "the first and most important thing you do is document everything. Every agreement, every broken promise, every instance of bad faith. You build an undeniable case. You don't go into a battle like that unarmed. And then," he continued, "you make sure you have your next venture lined up before you make your exit. You never, ever jump from a sinking ship without a life raft already in the water. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," I said, my throat a little tight. "It makes perfect sense. Thanks, Uncle Rob. That's really helpful." "Anytime, kid," he said, and I could hear the unspoken support in his voice. "You know where to find me if you need to talk about anything." That was step 2. The life raft was there. The final step was the hardest. It wasn't logistical or strategic. It was the internal battle, the war I had to wage against a lifetime of conditioning. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars. Sophia was asleep in the bedroom, her breathing soft and even. I was utterly alone with my thoughts. My phone, with its toxic little video file, sat on the coffee table. It felt like a grenade, and I was debating whether or not to pull the pin. For a moment, my resolve wavered. The sheer magnitude of what I was about to do washed over me. This wasn't just cutting ties with a business partner. This was my family. My mother, who had tucked me in at night. My father, who had, on rare occasions, shown flashes of pride. My brother, who was, underneath all the entitlement, still the little kid I had grown up with. Was I about to obliterate all of it? The fear that had been my constant companion my whole life, the fear of being truly, irrevocably alone, crept back in, cold and insidious. I got up and walked over to a bookshelf in the corner. Tucked in the back was an old, framed family photo. It was from a vacation to the Grand Canyon when I was 10 years old. We were all there, smiling for the camera, the vast canyon behind us. For a fleeting, painful second, I felt a wave of grief for the family in that picture, the family I so desperately wished we could have been. Then I looked closer, really looked. I was standing slightly apart from the other 3, who were clustered together. My father's hand was resting possessively on Kevin's shoulder. My mother was looking at Kevin, not the camera, her face alight with adoration. Even back then, at 10 years old, the dynamic was crystal clear. I wasn't part of the core unit. I was an accessory, an add-on. I placed the photo back on the shelf, my hand steady now. The sadness was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the doubt had vanished. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of self-preservation. I wasn't burning down my home. I was escaping a building that had been on fire for as long as I could remember. I was finally choosing to save myself instead of waiting for them to notice the smoke. I went back to the couch and picked up my phone. I watched the video one last time, not with pain, but with a cold, clear purpose. My fear was gone, replaced by a hard, unshakable certainty. I knew what I had to do. I was ready. The grand ballroom was a symphony of self-congratulation. Hundreds of people, dressed in their finest, swirled around the room, their laughter echoing off the high, ornate ceilings. My parents had spared no expense. This wasn't just a graduation party. It was a coronation. It was a public declaration of their success, a testament to their superior parenting, all embodied in their perfect son, Kevin. I found my assigned table, a small island in a sea of strangers. Sophia was already there, a beacon of calm in the overwhelming room. She took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "You okay?" she whispered, her eyes searching mine. "I'm ready," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. My parents were in their element, gliding through the crowd like royalty. My father's booming laugh punctuated the air as he accepted congratulations on their behalf. My mother, elegant and poised, smiled graciously. Kevin was holding court with a group of his adoring friends, looking every bit the young master of the universe. I sat through the dinner, a silent observer. I watched them perform, and for the first time I saw the strings. I saw the mechanics of their manipulation, the carefully constructed facade. And I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. After about an hour, my father made his way to the stage, taking the microphone with the easy confidence of a man who owned the world. The room fell silent, expectant. He launched into another one of his masterful speeches, weaving anecdotes about Kevin's charming childhood with grand predictions about his brilliant future. Then he turned the spotlight on me. It was exactly the move I had anticipated. "And of course," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me with theatrical precision. "A young man's success is also built on the support of his family. His entire family." He smiled, but it was a shark smile, all teeth and no warmth. "I know his older brother, James, is here tonight, and I'm sure James has a few words to say, and perhaps a special graduation gift to present, to show his own support for his brother's bright future. James, why don't you come on up?" He was cornering me, again, using public pressure as his weapon. He expected me to crumble, to walk up to that stage and meekly hand over my car keys, completing his perfect tableau of family unity. He expected the same old James. He was about to be very disappointed. This was it, the point of no return. I pushed my chair back and stood up. A hush fell over our section of the room. I could feel Sophia's encouraging gaze on my back. Across the room, Daniel gave me a subtle, almost invisible thumbs up. My Uncle Robert watched me, his expression intense, unreadable. I walked towards the stage, my steps even and measured. The 100-foot walk felt like a mile. I was acutely aware of every rustle of fabric, every clink of a glass. I felt strangely calm, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. As I passed the tech booth at the side of the room, I saw Daniel's friend, Mike. He gave me a quick, professional nod and gestured with his head towards the stage. The audio cable was there, coiled neatly by the podium, just as he'd promised. I walked up the small set of stairs and onto the stage. I took the microphone from my father's outstretched hand. He leaned in, clapping me on the back in a gesture that was meant to look fatherly for the audience, but felt like a vice grip to me. "Don't disappoint us," he whispered, his voice a low growl in my ear. I stepped away from him and turned to face the crowd. I took a deep breath, the smell of floral centerpieces and expensive perfume filling my lungs. "Thank you, Dad," I began, my voice amplified, clear and steady, filling every corner of the vast ballroom. "You're absolutely right. Family support is the most important thing in the world." I turned my head slightly to look at my brother. "Kevin, congratulations. You've graduated." A few scattered, uncertain chuckles rippled through the audience. "My father mentioned a gift," I continued, my gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "And he's right. I do have a gift for my brother and for my parents. It's not something you can hold in your hand. It's not something you can drive. It's something you really, really need to listen to. In fact, I think it's a message the whole family needs to hear." I saw a flicker of confusion cloud my father's face, quickly replaced by a flash of annoyance. My mother was frowning, a small, worried line appearing between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. Kevin just looked bored, impatient for his moment in the spotlight. With deliberate, unhurried movements, I bent down, plugged the audio cable into the headphone jack of my phone, and pressed play. The speakers crackled for a fraction of a second, and then my father's voice filled the room. But it wasn't his booming, public-speaking voice. It was his low, private, conspiratorial one. He's being stubborn. More stubborn than I anticipated. A wave of confusion washed over the crowd. People exchanged puzzled glances. My father's practiced smile froze on his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. Then came my mother's voice, sharp and crystal clear. He's always been difficult. So ungrateful. Her hand flew to her mouth, a gesture of pure, instinctual shock. Her face, a moment ago so radiant, was suddenly ashen. Then the final damning blows. Kevin's whining, entitled voice. So what's the plan? I need that car for my start date. And my father's reply, the words that had been seared into my soul, now echoing for all to hear. We'll handle it. Your mother will call him. She'll lay on the guilt. The main thing is we get the car. Once that's done, we can finally stop pretending we need him around so much. Silence. A dead, absolute, suffocating silence descended upon the grand ballroom. You could have heard a tear drop. Every single person in that room was staring, not at me, but at the three people frozen on the stage beside me. They looked like statues in a wax museum, their faces a ghastly uniform shade of white. The color had literally drained from them. My father opened and closed his mouth like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. His carefully constructed world had just been obliterated by his own words. My mother looked like she was going to collapse, her eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. And Kevin just looked small, pathetic. The smug, confident smirk was gone, replaced by the terrified, bewildered expression of a child who had just been caught in a lie he couldn't talk his way out of. I let the silence hang in the air for a few more seconds, a heavy, suffocating blanket. I wanted them to feel the full weight of it. I wanted them to feel the judgment of every single person in that room. Then, I leaned back into the microphone, my voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. So, to answer your question, Dad, I said, my voice calm and clear. No, you can't have my car. I unplugged my phone from the cable, placed the microphone carefully back on its stand, and walked off the stage. The sea of faces parted for me as I walked. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, pity, and for some, a dawning, horrified understanding. The perfect family portrait was shattered beyond repair, and everyone in the room had just watched me calmly sweep up the broken glass. The silence didn't last. It broke, not with a sudden crash, but with a rising tide of whispers that started at the tables closest to the stage and spread outwards like a contagion. The whispers grew into hushed, urgent murmurs. The party was over. The spectacle, however, had just begun. I didn't look back as I walked, but I could feel the collective gaze of the room shift from me to the trio I had left stranded on the stage. I felt like the eye of a hurricane, a strange pocket of calm moving through a storm of my own making. I reached my table. Sophia was on her feet instantly, her arms wrapping around me in a fierce, protective hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered into my ear, her voice thick with emotion. You did it. Daniel came over from his table, a look of pure, unadulterated awe on his face. He clapped me hard on the shoulder. Dude, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. That was legendary. Absolutely legendary. The scene on the stage was devolving into a pathetic, chaotic scramble. My father, his face now a blotchy, furious red, finally found his voice. He grabbed the microphone, his hand shaking so violently the stand rattled. A misunderstanding, he stammered, his voice cracking, a desperate, high-pitched squeak that was a pathetic imitation of his usual confident boom. Just a family joke, a poor taste joke. James. He's always been so sensitive, he takes things the wrong way. But the words were hollow, meaningless. No one was buying it. The recording had been too clear, the intent too nakedly cruel. People started to get up from their tables, not in a rush, but with a quiet, deliberate finality. They folded their napkins and placed them on the table. They were leaving. They were disassociating themselves from the ugliness they had just witnessed. A few of my older relatives, my great-aunts and uncles, the elders of the clan, walked past our table on their way to the exit. They didn't stop to talk, but each one, my great-uncle Charles, my great-aunt Helen, gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of congratulations. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a look that said, "It's about time someone stood up to him." My father, seeing his audience abandon him, tried to come after me. His face was a mask of pure rage and humiliation. You have no idea what you've done," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper as he stomped towards me. But before he could reach our table, two people intercepted him. The first was my Uncle Robert. He moved with a surprising quickness, placing a firm, restraining hand on his brother's chest. "That's enough, Thomas," he said, his voice low and commanding. "It's over. Go be with your wife. She looks like she needs you." The second person was my grandmother, Margaret, the true matriarch of the family. She was a small, elegant woman in her late 70s, always impeccably dressed, but she possessed a will of iron and a gaze that could cut glass. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. She walked right up to my father, her back ramrod straight, and looked him directly in the eye. "You have shamed this family, Thomas," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that cut through his blustering rage like a hot knife through butter. "You have shamed my name. You have aired our dirty laundry in a public ballroom. We will be having a talk. A long, thorough talk. About everything." It was more terrifying than any public condemnation. The unspoken implication about the family trust she controlled, about his inheritance, about his entire standing in the clan, hung in the air between them. My father deflated like a punctured balloon. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a new, dawning terror. He had just been publicly and unequivocally checkmated by the Queen. He turned, stumbling slightly, and shuffled back towards my mother, who was now openly sobbing, her face buried in her hands, being awkwardly comforted by a horrified-looking Aunt Patricia. As the room continued to empty out, leaving a graveyard of half-eaten desserts and abandoned champagne flutes, Uncle Robert came over to me. He looked tired, but there was a deep, unwavering respect in his eyes. "That took a level of courage I don't think I've ever seen, James," he said quietly. "I'm done, Uncle Rob," I said, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, leaving me feeling hollowed out and exhausted. "I'm done with all of it. For good." "I know," he said with a sad smile. He looked me straight in the eye, his expression serious. "My company is expanding. We're launching a new software development team, and we need a junior project manager to help steer the ship. It's a real job with real pressure. You'd have to earn your keep, prove yourself from day one. I won't play favorites. It's not a gift. It's not a handout. It's an opportunity. If you're interested, my door is open on Monday morning." He was offering me a life raft, just as he had advised on the phone. But he was doing it in a way that honored my hard-won independence. He wasn't saving me. He was giving me the tools and the chance to save myself. My throat felt tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was gratitude, yes, but it was deeper than that. It was the profound, life-altering feeling of being truly seen. "I'll be there," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you." I took Sophia's hand. Her fingers were warm and steady around mine. "Let's go home," I said, as we walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my old life smoldering behind us. I felt a strange and unfamiliar sense of peace settle over me. The world hadn't ended. A world had ended. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I finally had a chance to build my own. The first year after the explosion was a year of quiet, deliberate construction. It was about building a new life on the foundations of the old one I had just demolished. I started at my uncle's company, Innovatech, that following Monday. True to his word, it was no golden parachute. I was put on a demanding project developing a new logistics software for a major client. The deadlines were brutal, the expectations were high, and I was working with a team of sharp, experienced engineers who didn't know or care that I was the boss's nephew. I threw myself into the work. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I was fueled by a deep, burning desire to prove, not to my father, not to my old family, but to myself, that I was capable. That I was more than the ungrateful burden they had tried to make me believe I was. I started at the bottom, taking notes in meetings, fetching coffee, and handling the grunt work. But I listened. I learned. I asked questions. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to contribute. I found a flaw in a line of code that saved the team a week of work. I created a new scheduling system that streamlined our workflow. I remember one late night about 6 months in. We were facing a critical deadline, and a major bug had just surfaced. The whole team was stressed. Tensions were high. I spent hours combing through thousands of lines of code, my eyes burning, until finally, at 3 a.m., I found it. A single misplaced semicolon. It was a tiny error with huge consequences. The next morning, my project manager, a tough but fair woman named Sarah, pulled me aside. "Good work last night, James," she said. "You saved our asses." It was a simple sentence, but it meant more to me than any praise my father had ever given me. I was earning my place. I was building my own worth. At the same time, Sophia and I were building our home. We moved into a small, sunlit apartment in a neighborhood we loved. We couldn't afford much, so we spent our weekends painting the walls ourselves, hunting for furniture at flea markets and thrift stores, and slowly turning the empty space into a reflection of us. I'll never forget the day we finally managed to assemble a complicated IKEA bookshelf. We were both covered in sweat. We'd argued 3 times, but when we finally slid it into place and put our small collection of books on it, we just stood there, holding each other, laughing. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a statement of status. But it was a sanctuary. It was ours. I maintained a strict, unwavering no-contact rule with my parents and Kevin. I blocked their numbers. I created filters to send their emails directly to the trash. It felt like a necessary amputation. There were moments, especially around Christmas or on my birthday, when the phantom limb would ache. A pang of sadness for the family I wished I had. But I knew, with a certainty that was bone deep, that the sickness would have spread if I hadn't made the cut. News from their world trickled in, mostly through Uncle Robert or my cousin Emily, who I now spoke with on the phone every few weeks. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic collapse for them, but a slow, agonizing erosion. The story of the graduation party became a quiet legend in my father's social and business circles. He wasn't bankrupted overnight, but his reputation, the currency he valued above all else, was shattered. A key investor in a new real estate venture pulled out, citing concerns about his judgment and character. A longtime corporate client, a company that prided itself on its family-friendly image, chose not to renew their contract. The foundation of his empire, built on a carefully crafted illusion of integrity and family values, had developed deep, irreparable cracks. He was a man who sold an illusion, and I had ripped back the curtain for all to see. Kevin's life also veered off its golden track. He kept his job at the prestigious firm, but without the constant safety net and the unearned advantages that came with his father's powerful name, he floundered. He was just another junior associate in a sea of ambitious sharks, and he wasn't prepared for the relentless grind. He was used to being praised for minimal effort, and in the cutthroat world of corporate law, that didn't fly. He missed deadlines. His work was sloppy. He was put on probation. Melissa, his status-conscious girlfriend, stuck around for a few months, hoping things would blow over. But when it became clear that the family's wealth was not as secure as she had believed, and that Kevin was not the fast-tracked star she had bet on, she cashed out her chips. The official reason was that they had grown apart. The real reason was that her investment had soured. She left him for an older, wealthier partner at her own firm. 3 years after that fateful night, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. "Hello." There was a pause. "James?" I recognized the voice instantly, but it was different. The arrogant, entitled edge was gone, replaced by a hesitant, nervous quality I had never heard before. It was Kevin. "What do you want, Kevin?" I asked, my voice flat, my guard immediately up. I was wondering if we could talk," he said, stumbling over the words. "Maybe get a coffee sometime? Please, it's important." Against my better judgment, a flicker of curiosity made me agree. We met the following Saturday at a neutral coffee shop halfway between my apartment and his. The person who sat across from me was not the smug, polished boy I remembered. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. He had lost the expensive veneer. He looked humbled. He fumbled through awkward small talk for a few minutes before finally getting to the point. He looked down at his hands, then up at me, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. "I'm sorry, James," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I know those words are not enough. They can't fix anything. But I am truly, deeply sorry." He took a shaky breath and continued. "For my whole life, I believed the story they told me. That I was the special one, the chosen one, and you were the other one. The one who had to be tough because you weren't as smart or as promising as me. I see now how twisted that was. I spent the last 3 years failing, James. Really, truly failing. On my own. And it's the best, most painful thing that has ever happened to me." He told me about his struggles at work, about being humbled, about losing Melissa, about seeing our father not as a titan to be emulated, but as a bitter, disappointed man, terrified of his own mediocrity. "I have to tell you something else," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "About the car. It was Melissa. She was the one who planted that seed. Her family is old money, and she was obsessed with image, with what things looked like. She was the one who said I needed a better car to fit in, that you owed it to me, that it was a way to establish my position as the heir apparent. I was weak enough and stupid enough to listen to her, to believe her." He wasn't saying it to make an excuse. He was saying it as a confession. He was taking ownership of his own weakness, his own moral failure. "I was a coward," he said quietly, his eyes glistening. "And I was a terrible brother. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know that I finally see it. I finally see you." It was the first genuine crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for 3 long years. It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. But it was a start. A real, painful, and honest start. We didn't have a big, fancy wedding. 2 years after that coffee with Kevin, Sophia and I got married in the backyard of the small house we had just bought with our own savings. It was a simple, beautiful ceremony on a sunny afternoon, with about 30 guests. Our closest friends, Sophia's wonderful family, Uncle Robert and his wife, and my cousin Emily. A real family. Towards the end of the reception, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over everything, a car pulled up to the curb. Thomas and Linda got out. Kevin, who I had slowly, cautiously started to let back into my life, had told them about the wedding. They had come, uninvited, but perhaps, on some level, hoped for. They stood at the edge of the lawn, looking hesitant, uncertain, and profoundly out of place. They were older, grayer. The hard, arrogant edges had been worn down, replaced by a quiet, lingering sorrow. I looked at Sophia, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. We took each other's hand and walked over to them. "James?" my mother started, her eyes welling up with tears. "The house is beautiful. You both look so happy." "We are," I said simply, and the truth of that statement felt solid and real. My father, the man whose approval I had once craved like oxygen, held out a small, clumsily wrapped gift. He couldn't quite meet my eye. He looked at the life I had built. My home, my wife, my career. All of it achieved not just without his help, but in spite of his hindrance. He looked at me, and I think for the first time, he saw me not as a flawed extension of himself, but as my own man. "We're proud of you, James," he said, the words sounding foreign and difficult on his tongue, as if he were speaking a language he had never learned. "In your own way." It wasn't the perfect Hollywood apology I might have once dreamed of receiving. It was flawed, incomplete, and years too late. But it was real. It was the best he was capable of. And as I stood there, a married man, a homeowner, a partner in a life I loved. I realized it was enough. "Thank you, Dad," I said, and I meant it. They didn't stay long. The chasm between us was still too wide for that. But as I watched them leave, I didn't feel the old anger or the familiar bitterness. I just felt a quiet sense of closure. I turned back to Sophia, who was smiling at me, her eyes shining in the twilight. I pulled her close, and we stood there in the middle of our own backyard, listening to the sound of our friends' laughter. My happiness was no longer conditional on their approval. My worth was not determined by their validation. I had spent so many years fighting for a seat at their table, only to realize that true freedom wasn't about getting them to let me in. It was about having the courage to walk away and build a table of my own. I had my own family now, one built not on obligation or hierarchy, but on respect, partnership, and a love that was given freely, without strings attached. I was finally truly free. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace and well-being? I'd love to hear about it. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.